Hey guys, welcome to the second video of lesson 6. And I wanted to start off with just some things that we're familiar with. So we're going to call these old homework problems and kind of really talk about like what we're doing. So if I were to find the sine of 225, I would think about the unit circle and how the 225 angle is down here. And remember, sine is going to be that y value on the unit circle. And so then I would use my hand trick. So there's a 45-degree reference angle. So the sine would be square root of 2 over 2. And it's in quadrant 3, so it's going to be negative. So that's my thought process there. So my answer is negative square root of 2 over 2. We also did problems like this where we had the same thing, except we had radians. So I always tell you guys, like, my brain doesn't like exist in radians. Like I constantly move back and forth. Like, what does that look like in degrees? If you're comfortable with radians, like have at it. Like I know that that's going to be a 30-degree reference angle, and I know it's going to be in quadrant 3, but like I have to think about it. So I always just transfer it to degrees first. I think that's helpful. So really we're finding the tangent of 210 degrees. So I'll use the same unit circle over here. So we're talking about like right there. So we have a 30-degree reference angle. And so again, with my hand trick, the tangent would be square root of 3 over 3. And tangent in quadrant 3 is positive. Okay, so cosine of negative pi over 2. So again, I know that negative pi over 2 is negative 90. So my coordinate point would be 0, negative 1. So that cosine is going to be 0. And this angle is too big. That doesn't really tell me anything. So I'm going to subtract 360 from it. And I find out that it's the secant of 90 degrees. So let's go back up here. So the secant of 90 degrees, let's start out with those points again. Secant, that's a reciprocal of cosine. And so when I flip 0, that becomes undefined. Okay, so let's talk about what we did. We went from an angle to a ratio, an angle to a ratio, an angle to a ratio, an angle to a ratio. So with inverse functions, we're going from the ratio back to the angle, ratio back to the angle. And I know I'm sounding redundant here, but I want you to kind of wrap your mind around that concept. There's one other thing before we kind of tackle the new things is I want to think about the domain and range of each of them. So go back and look and think about which quadrants, given the domain, which quadrants are those going to be in? I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Given the range, which quadrants are those going to be in? Okay, so for sine, notice is going from, let's go back up here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So right here is going from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2. So that means it's going from negative 90 degrees to positive 90 degrees. So the quadrants that we're talking about are 1 and 4. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and try cosine and tangent and then come back. So push pause, then come back. Okay, so hopefully you figured out that cosine resides in quadrants 1 and 2, and tangent also resides in 1 and 4, like sine does. One other thing I want you to point out is like in every single one of these, one is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. So I'll give you an example here. So sine is going to be positive in quadrant 1, but negative in quadrant 4. So cosine, think about that. It's going to be positive in quadrant 1, but negative in quadrant 2. And tangent is going to be positive in quadrant 1 and negative in quadrant 4. So these signs are going to kind of tell us the values of certain things that we're going to do. Okay, so this is what our new homework problems are going to look like. So what I want you to do is think about, okay, so what does this mean? So wrap your mind around what this means. So let's come up here. This is why I had you do these. So here we came from an angle to a ratio. Now, so like, and another way to think of this, not just ratio, but like your answer on the unit circle. Now down here, we're going to go unit circle to angle. So our answer is actually going to be an angle measure. So sine inverse of -1. So think about, well, let's go up here. I'll show you one thing. So sometimes like go back to your XY chart here. So sine inverse of -1, -1 sine inverse, that's going to be negative pi over 2. So remember, this is our inverse graph. Don't forget that. This here is our inverse graph. So we're going from x to y. So our answer is going to be negative pi over 2. So negative 90 degrees. So let's think about that. So where on the unit circle is sine -1? So where on the unit circle is y -1? So this is 1, 0. Nope. This is 0, 1. Nope. This is -1, 0. And this is 0, -1. So that's where that is. So it's going to be negative pi over 2. If you want to, well, never mind, because it has to be between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. I was going to say, if you wanted to call it like 3 pi over 4, that's okay as well. Or sorry, 3 pi over 2, that's okay as well. But like go back to our domain here. Sorry, I keep saying that. Our range, we have to keep it in between these. So kind of keep that consistent, even though I realize that means the same thing. Okay. So why don't you try these two? So push pause and try those two and just see how you do. So remember, you're going backwards. So we're finding an angle measure here and an angle measure here. Okay, so this is my thought process. If you have your unit circle still, or you have access to one, like it's really helpful. I like, here, look what I did. I just kind of jotted down a visual of it to kind of help my brain think about this. So like I'm trying to figure out, okay, so like think about your hand trick too. Like what value of sine or what reference angle will give you a sine of 1/2? And so if you think about your hand trick, that's going to be a 30-degree reference angle. Okay, so sine is only in these two quadrants here. So it's either going to be positive 30 degrees or negative 30 degrees. And so because this is positive, it's going to be positive 30 degrees, which in radians is pi over 6. Okay, so this one, again, hand trick, I know that it's a 60-degree reference angle. I also know that it's negative, so it's going to be down in this fourth quadrant down here. 60 degrees in radians is pi over 3, so it's going to be negative pi over 3. Okay, so what I want you to do, hopefully now you have the hang of it. I want you to do these 6 for cosine and tangent and come back and see if you got the right answer. Okay, so I used different colors to kind of show the process that I went through. So the first thought process for all 6 of these are the blue. And so I just thought about, I just looked at each one of these and thought about what reference angle it would be. So on all of these. And then my second thought process was the purple. So I just tried to figure out like which quadrant it was in, or like which one worked. So for instance, like I knew that cosine went from 1 to 2, so I knew that this one couldn't work, so I crossed that out. I knew that like this was negative, so it had to be in quadrant 2. This is positive, so it had to be in quadrant 1. So that was kind of that second thought process I did. And then finally, I came up with the radians, knowing that it was like a 30-degree angle in quadrant 2, knowing that it was the 90-degree angle, knowing that it was a 45-degree angle in quadrant 1. Like that was the information I needed to get to my final answer. Okay, so the last part is I want to talk about like sine, inverse, and arcsine. Those mean the same thing. And like half the time you'll see it written like this. Half the time, a lot of times in calculus books, it's written as arcsine. So it means the same thing. So don't let that freak you out, that arcsine, when you see it. It looks weird, but it means the same thing. Okay, so the rest is just going to be, it's going to be super easy, but they're going to be calculator problems. So what you need to do is make sure, so like all of you guys have different calculators, but you need to make sure that you can get to radians. So go ahead, push pause, find your radian mode. And then we're going to use like tangent inverse, sine inverse, cosine inverse. We are going to use those buttons on your calculator. So see if you can find those buttons as well. We've used these before on calculators, so I think all of you guys should have it. If you don't, reach out to me. Let me know that you do not have it on your calculator. I think even phone calculators have it if you turn your phone sideways. So if you need any help there, let me know. But for the rest of this, I'm just going to put down my answers after I type it in the calculator and see if you get the same thing. And these are all radians. So like negative 1.24 radians. So remember, we don't put like degrees, we have to put a degree symbol, but this is just kind of blank, but they are radians. So go ahead and play with your calculator and see if you can get those values. If you cannot for some reason, make plans to Zoom with me sometime and I'll help you go through it. Okay, if you're still working, push pause, but if you're ready to go, let's move on to this next part. So notice that this said radians. And so now, because this is in degrees, I'm going to switch back to degree mode. So same thing, just make sure that this time is in degrees. And notice, guys, I use the same values in both cases. So then it's going to be negative 71 degrees, 48.6 degrees, 86.7 degrees, and 30 degrees. Again, there's not a lot to explain on this. It's just calculators. So if you need any help, just let me know. And that's it. Thanks, guys.